I am the first memory. I have seen empires ignited by a single spark, only to watch them crumble into a bed of silent ash. In Edgehaven, they believe they can cage the light, while the world around them dies. They are wrong. Our Kaelin sought only to warm their spirits, but in a world choked by the gray rot, hope is the most flammable thing of all. Today, a daughter's gift becomes her death sentence. If you are new to the forest, you must witness the first wisp of smoke at Chapter 1 now. For the rest of you, hold your breath. This is Chapter 2, a spark of devastation.
Kaelin awoke before dawn, the weight of a sleepless night heavy on her shoulders. Her thoughts were a swirling torrent of Alara's revelations and the looming dread of the festival. In the cool gray light of her cottage, she held her mother's necklace. Last night, it had been a burden. This morning, in the solitude before the world stirred, accepting it was a choice. Alara's words echoed in her mind. Never let them make you feel shame for the song you carry in your blood. With a steadying breath, Kaelin made a small, defiant decision. She slipped the worn leather cord over her head. The wooden spiral settled against her skin just above her heart, cool and solid. Once tucked beneath the collar of her tunic, it was a hidden shield, a secret truth known only to her. It was a first, tentative step toward the person Alara believed she could be. The harvest festival of Edgehaven arrived not with a joyous roar, but with a taut, hopeful hum. It was the sound of a community holding its breath, praying that the turning of the season would turn their luck along with it. The gray rot had gnawed at the edges of their prosperity for months. Now the ancient rites of fire and feasting felt less like a celebration and more like a desperate plea to the heavens. Kaelin felt the tension like a physical weight. She stood at the outermost fringe of the village square, a ghost at the feast, drawn there by Alara's firm insistence. Hiding is the same as admitting guilt, the old woman had rasped, pressing a small, lopsided honey cake into Kaelin's hand. Go, let them see you are just a girl, not a monster from their fireside tales. It was hard to feel like just another girl when every gaze that slid past her was laced with suspicion. Her own eyes scanned the square, searching for a place to hide. She saw ribbons in faded gold and rust. Their forced cheerfulness was a stark contrast to the granary, where the sheaves of wheat were pitifully thin compared to years past. In the center of it all, the great unlit bonfire stood like a silent accusation, waiting for a dusk she dreaded. Even the thick scents of baking bread and roasting meats felt thin. They were unable to mask the sterile odor of the rot that clung to the air like a shroud. Kaelin kept her head down. Her focus remained on the honey cake in her hand, its sticky sweetness a small, tangible comfort. She watched the life of the village swirl around her, a world she could see but never breach. Children with faces sticky with jam chased each other in wild, laughing circles. A group of young men, Finn among them, engaged in a boisterous contest of strength as they lifted heavy barrels to the cheers of onlookers. Finn caught her eye for a moment. His triumphant grin curdled into a familiar sneer before he turned away, dismissing her. It was a small thing, a mere flick of an expression, but it reinforced the invisible wall that stood between Kaelin and everyone else. A small girl with braids the color of corn silk, no older than 5, toddled away from her mother. She stopped in front of Kaelin, her blue eyes wide with simple curiosity, and held up a slightly wilted dandelion. Kaelin's heart constricted. Slowly she knelt and reached out to accept the small gift. Her fingers had just brushed the girl's when a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Maeve, come away from there." The girl's mother swooped in, snatching her daughter's hand and pulling her back with a force that was rougher than necessary. The woman didn't look at Kaelin. Her fear was a palpable thing, a cold wave that washed over the space between them. The dandelion fell to the dusty ground, forgotten and crushed. Kaelin's days darted away, only to be snagged by another. Elder Thane stood by the steps of the meeting hall. His arms were crossed over his ceremonial robes. He was a man carved from hard opinions and harder winters. His eyes cut through the crowd, finding her with an unnerving precision. Unlike Finn, his look wasn't hot with anger. It was cold with an analytical certainty that made her skin crawl. He looked at her as though she were a blighted plant he was assessing for uprooting. To him, she was not a lonely girl. She was a problem waiting for a solution. A shiver traced its way down her spine. Kaelin pulled her thin shawl tighter, wishing for nothing more than the sanctuary of her quiet cottage. Dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky as the villagers gathered. The laughter and games subsided, replaced by a solemn, expectant silence. Families drew together, their faces turned toward the unlit pyre in the center of the square. This was the heart of the festival, the moment intended to define the year to come. The sacred fire was meant to be a beacon of hope. Its flames were a promise of life and warmth, designed to ward off the winter and the deeper chill of the gray rot. Kaelin remembered festivals from her childhood, before her parents had left. In those years, the fire had caught on the first strike, sending a triumphant howl of light through the square. This year, the silence before the spark felt heavier. Elder Thane moved to the center of the circle, his presence commanding. He held a flint and steel, tools of the ritual passed down for generations. The crowd drew a collective breath. On this day, Thane's voice boomed, deep and resonant. We offer this fire to the sky and the soil. We burn away the sorrows of the year past, the blight on our crops, the sickness in our herds, the fear in our hearts. He struck the flint. A weak spark flew, only to wink out on the damp tinder. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Thane's expression tightened. He struck again, his movements more forceful. But the spark was feeble and swallowed by the twilight. The collective anxiety became a physical weight. A failed fire was the worst of all omens. It meant their offerings were rejected and their pleas unheard. It meant the darkness was winning. Standing at the back, Kaelin felt their panic as a physical force. The cool wood of her mother's necklace warmed against her skin. It was as though a faint hum of power were answering the raw, desperate emotion of the crowd. An instinct deep within her rose to meet it. It was the same desperate need to soothe and to mend. A heritage, not a curse, she thought. Her hand instinctively went to the hidden spiral. Her mother could make things bloom. Perhaps this power wasn't something to hide. Perhaps it was something that could help. She wanted the fire to light. She wanted to see the fear on those faces replaced with relief. She sent a silent, fervent plea from the core of her being. It was a tiny, focused push of her will, channeled through the legacy of her mother. Please, light. Give them this one good thing. Let them have their hope. The spark that answered her plea was not the flicker of flint on steel. It was a silent internal ignition. The bonfire didn't catch. It erupted. With a deafening, concussive roar that stole the air from every lung, the pyre exploded into a pillar of violent, impossible life. The flames surged 50 feet into the air. They weren't the familiar orange and red of a normal fire, but a terrifying vortex of emerald green and brilliant gold. The heat was a physical blow. It forced the entire crowd to stumble backward while shielding their faces with cries of shock and terror. The fire sounded like a great beast, waking from a long slumber. It consumed the massive oak logs in moments. The ghastly green and gold light washed over the square. It cast wild, dancing shadows that twisted the faces of her neighbors into monstrous masks. Panic shattered the solemnity. People were screaming and scrambling away from the inferno. Their prayers were forgotten in the face of such terrifying power. The fire remained contained to its stone pit, but its unnatural life was an undeniable violation. It was a sacrilege at the heart of their most sacred rite. A phantom echo of that power slammed back into Kaelin. It was a physical force that made her teeth ache and her vision swim. The scent of ozone and alien blossoms filled her lungs. The perfume was so thick, it was suffocating. The strength fled from her knees. She stood frozen, with her hands pressed against her mouth, her eyes wide with the scale of her mistake. She had wanted to offer a candle flame. Instead, she had unleashed a star. No, not like this, she thought. The scream was silent in her mind. They'll see. They'll finally have their proof. Through the shimmering, ghastly light, Elder Thane turned. His face was a mask of fury. His eyes burned with a cold fire of their own. He scanned the terrified crowd, and then he found her. The weight of his gaze was a physical thing. It pinned her in place. While everyone else ran, Kaelin could only stand frozen in a pool of horrified stillness. His eyes locked onto hers. In them, she saw no doubt. He knew. You. His voice was a raw, accusing roar that sliced through the din. He pointed a trembling, condemning finger directly at her. This is your doing. This is witchfire. He strode toward her, his long shadow leaping ahead. His fear had found an object. It was swiftly transmuting into the hard, satisfying certainty of righteous anger. The crowd, desperate for someone to blame for the terror, turned as one. Their panicked eyes fell upon Kaelin. In an instant, 100 separate fears sharpened into a single, lethal blade of blame. We have tolerated your ill luck and your cursed touch for too long, Thane bellowed. He stopped just before her. The blacksmith, Finn's father, moved to stand beside the elder. His massive arms were a barricade of muscle and conviction. Others followed, forming a hostile, closing circle. You have brought the forest's chaos into our celebration. You have tainted our sacred fire. Kaelin felt the air leave her lungs. The circle of faces was a blur of anger and terror. They weren't seeing her anymore. They were seeing a monster. A scapegoat for the gray rot and the failed harvest. I didn't mean to, she stammered, the words feeble and useless. But in their panicked state, her admission of involvement was a confession. It was all the proof they needed. Enough! A sharp, raspy voice cut through the rising anger. Alara pushed her way through the human wall. Her small, stooped frame radiated a surprising force as she placed herself between Kaelin and the elder. She is a child. It was an accident. Her heart is good, Thane. You know it is. Her heart is tangled with the Elderbranch. Thane spat, unmoved. And the forest has no heart. It has only hunger. He looked down at Alara with cold dismissal. You have sheltered this blight for too long, old woman. Be thankful we do not condemn you alongside her. Alara's face finally crumpled with a sorrowful defeat. She knew this battle was lost. The village's fear was a tide too strong to turn. Elder Thane turned his full attention back to Kaelin. The fire behind him was beginning to die. Its magical fuel was spent, leaving behind a pile of pulsing embers that cast a sick, reddish light on the silent tribunal. His voice dropped. It grew colder and heavier. Each word was a stone cast upon her. Kaelin, he said. The use of her name was a formal stripping of any last shred of community. For bringing unnatural and dangerous magic into our midst, and for profaning our most sacred rite, you are banished from Edgehaven. The word hung in the sudden, dead silence of the square. Banished. You will leave at dawn, he continued. His voice was void of any emotion. You will take what you can carry, and you will walk into the forest that spawned your kind. If you are seen within sight of our fields after sunrise tomorrow, you will not be given a warning. You will be treated as the monster you are. He sealed the judgment with a sharp, final nod. The circle of villagers began to break apart. Their purpose was served. They did not look at her as they left. They averted their eyes and shuffled away to their homes. As the circle broke, Kaelin's gaze accidentally met that of Rorik. He looked away instantly. He couldn't hide the flicker in his face, not the hard satisfaction of the others, but a pale, frightened shame. Then he too was gone. She was left in the sudden, vast emptiness of the square. Ilara reached out a trembling hand, but Kaelin was beyond her touch, trapped in a bubble of cold shock. Kaelin stood alone in the center of the ruin. At her feet, the dying embers cast her shadow long and solitary across the stones of the empty square. She looked away from the silent houses. Beyond the rooftops loomed the Elderbranch, a dark wall of ancient mystery. The wooden necklace against her skin pulsed once. One world had violently rejected her. The other was waiting.
The embers are cold. The village has turned its back. And now the forest begins its work. They believe they have cast out a monster, but they have only planted a seed in the wild soil. If you mean to follow Kaelin into the dark, do not go unprepared. At the foundation of this record, I have left a way to find your guardian and a collector pack for the journey. Claim them now, before the light fails. In our next meeting, the shadows begin to speak. I remain the first memory. Watch the shadows, for they are watching you.